Yes, we are finally back. Welcome to The Rationalist. I'm your host, Rick Adams, and thank you so much for joining us. Now, it's no secret that America's war on drugs has been a miserable failure since its inception and implementation in the early 1970s. But what's even worse is that this so-called war was started as a ploy to systematically lock up minorities and anti-war citizens during Vietnam. Then, a short decade later, we threw in mandatory minimums and privatized prisons, and now the U.S. has this criminal-like operation that generates an estimated $4.8 billion a year by incarcerating low-level, non-violent drug offenders. It's an unbelievably rigged system, especially if you're poor, but even worse if you're poor and a minority. Even President Nixon's domestic policy chief, John Ehrlichman, stated in this 1994 article, the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. And vilifying minorities on the evening news is a mainstay of America's media networks. Just look how the media has portrayed asylum seekers and Muslims over the last few years, right? According to Fox News and Ku Klux Klan accountant Tucker Carlson, asylum seekers are all part of the MS-13 gang, or they're all terrorists, which obviously isn't true and doesn't even make sense statistically. But if all that wasn't terrible enough, here's another disgusting fact. Many private prisons in the US have contract clauses called lockup quotas, which forces prisons to retain at least a 90% or more occupancy rate at all times, or the state will be fined. And a private prison in Arizona threatened the state with exactly that, arguing the prison company had lost over $10 million due to the empty cells, so the state of Arizona had to pay a $3 million fine for not having enough criminals locked up. What? Okay, first, how is that even legal? Basically incentivizing states to lock up more citizens. And second, we, the taxpayer, are the ones paying those fines. So that means, realistically, we're now being penalized for having lower crime rates in our cities. And I mean this with all sincerity in my heart. What the fuck is actually happening here? And to top off this entire shit sandwich, the United States typically wastes more than $15 billion a year waging a futile war on humans using substances that will alter their mental state, which unfortunately will never stop, because animals and mammals alike, not just modern day humans, have been altering their consciousness using an array of different substances for millennia. For example, scientists have recently discovered that these beautiful and majestic horses enjoy tripping balls by eating hallucinogenic weeds. Elephants are getting fucked up on overripe fruit. Bighorn sheep love eating narcotic lichen, and monkeys have been found to have a strong attraction to sugar-rich and ethanol-containing fruit, which scientists say may also explain why humans have such a natural attraction towards alcohol. But illicit drug use amongst the animal kingdom doesn't stop there. Scientists have also discovered that dolphins, the highly intelligent mammals of the sea, like to chew on pufferfish because the deadly fish toxins that are released send dolphins into a trance-like state. Then, the dolphins will swim up near the surface of the water and stare at their reflections. In other words, dolphins are using deadly fish toxins to get super fucked up and stare at themselves in the mirror. And honestly, who hasn't been that fucked up before? And a quick side note, one of the most fascinating parts about the dolphins getting fucked up is that the toxins that are released could be deadly for dolphins like heroin is for humans. And just like a human trying to avoid a deadly overdose, dolphins know to only briefly chew on the pufferfish to avoid death and achieve the high that they seek. Our universe is so unbelievably amazing. But why is changing our consciousness, which seems to be a natural decision living creatures are making all over the planet, have to be so goddamn illegal? It seems like a cruel and unjust punishment if you ask me. Now, the US government insists on becoming the morality police of the world for some stupid reason, and they're trying to stop everyone from getting high, which, as we all know, is a huge waste of time and, more importantly, a huge waste of valuable resources, because honestly, we're all still getting really fucking high. And clearly, the cartels are still making billions and billions of dollars. Around $360 billion a year, to be exact. But America's war on drugs has another major hurdle to contend with, and that's capitalism. My point being, if the United States government actually wanted to put a stop to the drug cartels, which they really don't, because a good portion of America's economy is built on businesses that benefit from enforcing these anti-drug policies, like we mentioned earlier with private prisons and parole monitoring companies like Sentinel Offender Services, the Department of Corrections, prison security companies, border patrol agencies, and other agencies like the DEA, Homeland Security, the CIA, and also let's not forget all the weapons and arms manufacturers that these companies and departments buy from. You know, like Boeing and Lockheed Martin, Smith & Wesson, etc., etc., etc. But honestly, to put the cartels out of business, you don't need to send armed personnel to unload violent gunfights in countries where poor people make drugs in the jungle. You know, the same reason Apple's CEO Tim Cook doesn't send a platoon of fully armed Genius Bar employees over to Samsung with shoot-to-kill orders. This is capitalism. If you want to crush your opponent, you need to put out a superior product. This is the main reason we have Google and why we're not stuck using Ask Jeeves to look up our ever-changing porn interests. So if the United States actually wanted to crush the cartels, we need to make and distribute a superior drug products, because trying to stop all of humanity from buying drugs is a really stupid idea. And yes, I am suggesting that the United States manufacture and regulate their own drugs such as pharmaceutical-grade heroin. Because it's no coincidence that many of the drug cartels have minimized their marijuana production due to the United States' growing legalization policies. So legalization does work in dismantling the drug cartels' revenue sources, as we've already started to see. Now I know, legalizing heroin seems like some crazy radical idea, but I assure you it's not. Switzerland, you know, the beautiful country way the fuck over there, they started a legalized heroin program back in the early 2000s when they had a very similar opioid situation. But Switzerland, with their superior intellect and universal healthcare, realized immediately that treating addiction as a health issue instead of a criminal complaint was not only way more cost effective for the taxpayer, but the program has also shown to have positive effects for the heroin users themselves. Take a look.
Heroin is a destructive force that tears at the fabric of society. In Vancouver, hundreds of addicts are dying from HIV. In Chicago, drug-related murders happen nearly every day. Perhaps unsurprisingly in America, the government treats heroin addiction as a law enforcement problem. But elsewhere in the world, governments treat it as a medical condition. Switzerland, one of the richest and by reputation most conservative countries in Europe. But during the 1980s and 90s, Switzerland was in the grips of a heroin plague. In the capital, Bern, drug-related crime was through the roof. It was a national disgrace.
I used to live right next to that needle park. It was horrible. People died there. There was petty crime all around in the city. It was just totally out of hand. It was a terrible situation.
In response to a public outcry, the government came up with a revolutionary program, way beyond the clean needles and counseling offered in North America. Free heroin for addicts who meet the criteria, prescribed by doctors, courtesy of the taxpayer. Dr. Christoph Buerki has been part of this radical experiment from the beginning. His clinic in Bern is one of 23 centers around the country that dispense heroin like medicine.
So this is where we keep the heroin. It comes in those 10 grams ampules that will later on be dissolved with sterile water.
Every patient in this clinic receives a controlled dose of pharmaceutical-grade heroin.
And as you can see, it's a transparent, clear fluid. It's nothing compared to that soup-like consistency of the street heroin in a syringe. Here it's 100% pure heroin.
Before Boerke's clinic was established, heroin addiction forced his patients into a life of crime, prostitution, and homelessness. They were disconnected from medical services and addiction treatment.
The type of patient we have in this clinic is a different one. It's a patient that we normally don't get in touch with. They were out on the street, but we didn't really get in touch with. We couldn't really integrate them into a treatment. Now here it's possible. They do come every day.
Karen has turned her life around thanks to her commitment to this radical program.
Seit ich hier bin, hat sich mein Leben sehr verbessert, nur zum Positiven. Durch das, dass ich komme zwar zweimal hier hin, bin in diesem Sinn auch festgebunden an etwas, aber ich habe den Rest von meinem Leben, also von der Zeit, kann ich arbeiten, ich kann Hobbys haben, ich kann Freundschaften pflegen. Ja. Eben Zeit, die ich vorher nicht hatte für das.
Dr. Boerke has no illusions as to why his patients come to him.
They come to me because I or my team provides them with the heroin. But through that contact, we can start making other things an issue. We can start working really on mental health issues as well as on other issues in their life. And that's the core value of heroin prescription. It's incredible and I like it every day. You get in touch with people through this type of treatment that before that in the professional field we did not get in touch with. So this is absolutely fascinating.
The free heroin program may be controversial, but since it began, there's been a 60% drop in felonies committed by its patients, and the societal cost per addict has been halved. The program doesn't solve every problem, but it reduces the impact of heroin addiction on Switzerland.
It's pretty amazing that through these programs, addicts are able to rebuild their lives and get off the streets because their addiction is under supervised control. Plus, those Switzerland communities have also noticed other positive changes as well. For example, the dirty needles that typically littered the parks and streets stopped, which helps control the spread of diseases like hepatitis C and HIV. Plus, more importantly, the crime rates in those same communities have also seen a significant reduction as heroin users no longer need to commit felony offenses to care for their addiction. These profound changes have encouraged other countries such as Canada and even Germany. That's right, fucking Germany. The country that has twice tried to pick a fight with the world has even found compassion for heroin addicts, and they too started a legalized heroin program because once again, these programs have not only shown to have positive effects for the surrounding communities, but for the addicts as well. And clearly, I understand the knee-jerk reaction is to be against giving drug addicts drugs in a medical setting. But there's a few things we all need to acknowledge here as basic facts about how the world works. First, and this is just a statement of fact, but some drug addicts are never ever going to get sober. Ever. No matter what. The severe damage has already been done. And second, all drug addicts, not just heroin users, are already getting their drugs from somewhere, even with the war on drugs in full effect for the last 40 plus years. Seriously, just think about today. Every drug addict eventually got their fix, whether they had to steal or con someone out of money, maybe they had to suck or fuck someone for some cash to buy drugs. But today, somehow, some way, drug addicts all around the world were able to get what they needed. Hopefully, because going through withdrawal is a whole nother nightmare that we don't have time to get into right now. And honestly, not to scare any parents out there, but it's easier now than ever to purchase any and all illegal narcotics because of the wonderful World Wide Web. For instance, here's a screenshot from a popular site called the Dream Market, which recently decided to close down its doors after being around for a few years offering their services. But when this site was active, they sold everything, from drugs to premium porn passwords, even counterfeit money. It's pretty incredible when you think about it. But our legal department has advised me not to get into any specifics here. But I assure you, this website was 100% real and was exactly like ordering from Amazon. Not that I would know that personally. Also, the site may or may not have offered different shipping options for those customers who needed to get their goodies the next day. Kind of like the Amazon Prime of narcotics. But once again, not that I would know that personally. It's just what we found out doing our research for this episode. Wink. Wait, do I say wink or do I actually wink? And I know some people are skeptical and will argue, bullshit, drug packages we caught by US Customs or the Postal Service. And I don't mean to destroy the illusion of security theater we have here in the United States, but most drug packages are not caught by the post office. And if drugs are shipped within the United States, package senders don't even need to worry about customs at all.
New at 11, as the nation spends billions to block drugs at the border, smugglers have found a gaping hole. Our own Postal Service to get you drugs into your neighborhood. The post office says it's overwhelmed by this problem and there isn't much it can do about it.
9 Under Side's Kristen Swilley shows just how often narcotics go undetected.
It's simple. And that's the idea. Drug dealers are counting on a package like this slipping through the mail and becoming a needle in a haystack. But the amount of heroin or fentanyl that can fit inside one of those packages can kill hundreds of people.
It's just so easy to get stuff through the mail.
While some dealers get creative, others are decidedly old school.
I mean, there's still groups that just send bulk marijuana, bales of marijuana in a box.
And as crazy as it sounds, it's working.
It's not like they're checking your ID or anything either, so, you're walking up, you're paying a fee, and off it goes.
Matt Davies with U.S. Customs and Border Protection, which works with the Postal Service to detect drugs, says the problem with narcotics arriving via snail mail is part technology, part manpower.
The facility itself is constrained by infrastructure. I mean, we only have 5 conveyor belts that the mail can be processed on.
More belt space means a more thorough process and fewer deadly drugs going undetected.
The purity of the fentanyl that we're seeing in these express consignment and the mail facilities is closer to 97-98% purity, which means it's that much more lethal.
Postal Service inspectors are finding more drugs than ever before. From 2016 to 2017, there was a 375% increase in international package seizures due to drugs and an 800% increase domestically.
There's just so many avenues and opportunities for these groups to use our own systems against us, and they do.
So now that we've established that the war on drugs is not stopping narcotics from being readily available and easily accessible, let's cover a few other worldly truths. For instance, a common misconception is that heroin users are abusing heroin because it's the best or strongest opioid out there. And that's simply not true. Most heroin addicts start out by using and abusing prescription pain medication like Oxycontin. Then, once the pills get too expensive to buy every day at $50 a pill, addicts move on to abusing heroin because it's the cheapest at $10 a bag and probably the most readily available opioid these days. Now, it's pretty safe to assume that Purdue Pharma's Oxycontin pills and outlandish marketing campaign is 100% how and why the US has this growing opioid epidemic. These old school crushable Oxycontin pills were perfectly designed for abuse. And honestly, just seeing all these beautiful Oxy 80s gets my dopamine receptors all tingly. Kind of like Spider-Man's Spidey sense, only this tingling will make all your money and your family's love for you disappear. Now, I'm not saying that Purdue Pharma purposely designed Oxycontin to be abused, but the makers of Oxycontin had to know that the pills were easily abusable. And you may think, Rick, how the hell would you know? So, not too long ago, I worked in what's known as clinical research at a large medical university and hospital. And there was never a time where a pharmaceutical company like Purdue Pharma, who spent millions upon millions of dollars on research and development on a particular drug like Oxycontin, by testing that drug on lab rats and mice, then testing that drug on monkeys before moving on to human clinical trials with larger and larger populations of humans across the entire United States, maybe even around the globe, to hopefully achieve the Holy Grail, which in this case would be FDA approval. But after all that research and testing, there was never a time during my professional career in clinical research where, once again, a pharmaceutical company like Purdue Pharma didn't know the efficacy and safety of that particular drug. It's complete fucking horseshit that Purdue Pharma claimed that OxyContin was not only a better alternative to other oxycodone meds, but that OxyContin was somehow less addictive as well. Which is just an insane fucking thing to say about one of the most addictive substances on the planet. And it's an especially insane statement because those claims were so far from the truth, it should have been illegal to say out loud. And if that isn't proof enough that Purdue Pharma knew exactly what they were developing with OxyContin, I'll let former president and director of Purdue Pharma, Dr. Richard Sackler, explain as he did during his deposition in August of 2015. Doctor?
This didn't just happen. It was a deftly coordinated, planned event that took dozens of workers years of effort to succeed. The most demanding new drug approval package for any analgesic product ever submitted didn't languish at the agency. Unlike the years that other filings linger at FDA, this product was approved in 11 months, 14 days. Our previous best approval time for other products was measured in years, not months.
Wow, by those accounts, it seems like Dr. Sackler knew exactly what Purdue Pharma was doing all along. And quickly, a big thank you to HBO's Last Week Tonight with John Olive for recreating Dr. Sackler's deposition using the actual transcripts and then getting one of television's most iconic drug dealers to play the part. It just seems so fitting. But what bothers me the most about all of this is that any competent medical professional, including Dr. Richard Sackler, should have known that an opioid like OxyContin would be extremely addictive. Even in the 1800s, physicians already knew that morphine was highly addictive. So any rational human being, whether they had a medical degree or not, should have known that OxyContin would be extremely addictive. Especially because oxycodone, the drug in OxyContin, is 50% stronger than morphine. That's why I personally think that Dr. Sackler's medical degree should be confiscated and burned in front of him while he's being arrested for medical negligence and conspiracy to fraud the United States. Then, all the Sackler family's billions and billions of dollars that they made from the sale of OxyContin should be seized under civil forfeiture laws and be used to fund rehab centers and mental health facilities all across the United States. Thankfully, in 2009, the National Institute on Health, or the NIH for short, funded a research study into the promotion and marketing of OxyContin. In this study, researchers have found that during Purdue Pharma's aggressive marketing campaign of OxyContin to doctors, sales representatives were trained to carry the message that the risk of addiction with OxyContin was less than 1%, which again, is just an insane thing to say out loud. And any intelligent medical professional should have known that couldn't possibly be true. Wait, what's this, Dick? You made a non-addictive form of heroin? Get the fuck out of here! No, seriously, get the fuck out. But to make matters even sleazier, Purdue Pharma was found to be incentivizing doctors to prescribe OxyContin over other pain meds by inviting those doctors on all-expense paid trips to symposiums Purdue Pharma was hosting. And during this time, Purdue Pharma was also found to be using national databases of doctors and healthcare professionals who prescribe the most opioids and aggressive marketing OxyContin as a better alternative, which once again was just a blatant lie to sell more heroin pills. Researchers had also found in 2001 alone, Purdue Pharma has spent over $200 million to promote and market OxyContin to doctors based on those false claims, which were, once again, that less than 1% of patients get addicted, and that OxyContin was a better alternative to other meds, of which, in the FDA's own medical review, found that OxyContin had not been shown to have a significant advantage over other oxycodone meds. And we're worried about the drug cartels? Give me a fucking break. And right now, heroin is currently listed by the DEA as a Schedule I narcotic, which means that heroin has no accepted medical uses, even though it was once marketed by Bayer Pharmaceutical as a treatment for tuberculosis, and ironically, a remedy for morphine addiction. But Oxycontin, on the other hand, is listed as a Schedule II narcotic because it has a medical use for pain. But I would argue that Oxycontin has more potential for abuse over heroin, which it does, and that's why Purdue Pharma was forced to redesign Oxycontin pills so they couldn't be crushed and snorted or dissolved and injected. But then again, patients probably assumed that injecting Oxycontin was safe because their doctor told them that less than 1% get addicted. Now, with heroin being so illegal, addicts are forced to buy it from the black market, which is severely unregulated and the main reason behind all the opioid deaths. Because even if what you are buying is heroin, we still have no clue the strength or purity of that drug. And that's a major problem in itself. And more recently, when addicts think they are buying heroin, most of the time it's something far more dangerous and cheaper to produce, like fentanyl. The truth is, if the US government started a legalized heroin program and safe injection sites, not only would that ruin the drug cartel's revenue streams and promptly cut down on the overdose deaths, but drug addicts could get information about treatment options like Suboxone meds when they talk to a doctor while getting their prescription heroin. You know, just like when other patients go and get their highly addicted prescriptions filled, like Xanax or Valium, or America's new favorite drug for getting shit done, Adderall. This process in the medical community is called making an informed decision about your care, and it's a mainstay of our healthcare industry. It's offered to every disease and sickness out there except for drug addicts and the mentally ill. But without the information of all the different treatment options out there, drug addicts and the mentally ill could spend a lifetime of misery never knowing help is available. And I realize some people will be angered by my suggestion that the US should legalize heroin. But highly addictive drugs like heroin and crystal meth are already legal in the US with a prescription. For example, Adderall, prescribed to over 16 million Americans, is crystal meth in pill form. Don't believe you're giving your kids meth before school? Well, here's both the chemical structure for Adderall and meth. See, Adderall is just one methyl group away from being straight meth. Even Dr. Hart, professor of neuroscience and psychology at Columbia University, explained the only major difference between crystal meth and Adderall is the public's perception of the two. And the same thing can be said for Oxycontin and heroin. Yes, different chemical structures, but one we see as a pain medication that mum takes, and the other as a drug that dirty junkies use and should be punished for liking its euphoric effects. But they're literally the same fucking thing. It's maddening. Also, let's not forget, there's another highly addictive substance that's literally in everything we consume, and our kids fucking love it. That's right, sugar is a highly addictive substance. That's why it's added to every food product on earth. And yes, chemically very different from cocaine, but fun fact, both sugar and cocaine highlight the same receptor sites in the brain. Fun, right? So if you ever wondered why it's so goddamn difficult to give up sugar, it's because sugar is really addictive. So those terrible headaches and those angry, shitty feelings we all get when trying to avoid sugar are called physical withdrawal symptoms. So it's no wonder my 6-year-old nephew sold all his wrestling toys for some old half-melted Halloween candy. But so many of our illegal drugs already have a medical version that's being marketed and sold to millions of adults and our kids. And these pharmaceutical companies are making billions of dollars just like the cartels. I find it crazy that we have no qualms with giving our kids meth pills to settle them the fuck down, but giving someone heroin because they're physically dependent on it is completely out of the question. Humans are so goddamn silly, sometimes it's confusing. And I never thought I would say something like this out loud, but places like Switzerland and Canada are quickly becoming two of the more exciting countries to live. Canada recently legalized marijuana across the entire country, and in 2016, Canada also quietly approved a new drug regulation similar to Switzerland's program, which permitted doctors to prescribe pharmaceutical-grade heroin to treat severe addicts, as well as introducing safe injection sites into communities. Even in the early stages of both of these programs, Canada and Switzerland have not only saved countless lives from drug overdoses, but many addicts are now able to regain control over their lives and have become functioning members of society as a result. And the United States could start doing the same thing tomorrow. Imagine if the US funneled the over $15 billion a year we waste on hunting drugs like a cat chasing a laser pointer into rehabilitation centers and mental health facilities. We could potentially help millions of people rebuild their lives. Heck, maybe even some of the mass shootings would go down. But I know, I'm getting ahead of myself here. But the truly sad part about all this is, most drug addicts are regular folks like you and I, who just got trapped in the cycle of addiction. Trust me, and I know it doesn't look like it now, but to tell you the truth, I was a dirty junkie. I was addicted to heroin like 12 years ago, and it all started out by abusing OxyContin because those fucking things were everywhere, just like Dr. Sackler and Purdue Pharma set out to do.
The launch of OxyContin tablets will be followed by a blizzard of prescriptions that will bury the competition. The prescription blizzard will be so deep, dense, and white.
So I certainly know how quickly that addiction storm comes about. And most addicts think they have no way out besides death or jail. That's because we shove drug addicts and the mentally ill into the streets, leaving them to figure out on their own. And I cannot think of a more idiotic idea than to leave life-altering decisions up to a person who is either addicted to drugs, mentally ill, or both. What's worse is we sit back and judge these junkies who are literally at the end of the ropes, and we wonder why they can't get their shit together. Well, dummies, why the fuck are we leaving tough decisions up to a person who's either physically dependent on drugs or mentally ill? How fucking foolish are we to think drug addicts are going to make better decisions for themselves? Just think of heroin legalization and possibly the legalization of other narcotics as a ploy to lure drug addicts and the mentally ill into our healthcare system to treat not only their addiction problems, but to treat the underlying mental health issues that led to them abusing drugs in the first place. It's a win-win-win. We all win. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it seems that we've shoved addicts and the mentally ill outside for too many years, and it's gotten so bad that the only thing left for our privileged society to do now is actually help. It's the only option we have left. Because we tried locking them up in psych wards, we tried locking them up in prisons, we pushed them under overpasses and down dirty alleys. We've consistently stepped over them on our ways to Sunday brunch or ignored them on our walks to the gym, including myself. But it's getting too hard to ignore, and now it seems that there are so many in need that we have to do something radically different today. Industries always want to know what their ROI is, or return on investment. Basically, how much money could be made if we decide to invest? So, let's answer that question. Instead of wasting billions of our tax dollars sending rockets to Mars, which has a huge negative return on investment, think about investing in mental health and drug recovery. And if the US government invested money into rehabilitation centers and mental health facilities for when people inevitably get hooked on drugs and or alcohol, instead of haphazardly throwing them into programs that obviously don't stop drugs from coming into the country, the return on investment would be astronomical. The data shows for every dollar invested in treatment yields up to $7 in reduced crime-related costs. Holy shit, that's a gigantic return, right? So let's do a little experiment. If I told you that for every dollar you spent on improving your home, you would save up to $7 in insurance and property tax related costs, you'd be fixing shit around the house that didn't even need it because you'd be crazy not to with a return that substantial. So it seems insane to me that the United States is not investing our tax dollars accordingly. Why the fuck are we wasting so much of our money on bullshit policies that clearly don't work and crush the poorest of our communities? But if we did invest accordingly, just think of the possibilities. Investors would invest in pharmaceutical companies manufacturing medical-grade narcotics. Sales revenue would boom like we've seen with OxyContin, which went from $48 million in sales to $1.1 billion in only 4 years. Illegal drug sales would decrease because those same drugs would now be safely available by in-person prescription. And that's the key thing here. In-person prescription. We're not sending you home with a 30-day supply of preloaded heroin syringes. That's how the whole OxyContin epidemic jumped off. Patients had literally an unlimited supply of heroin pills. But then shortly thereafter, crime rates are lower because drug dealers and drug addicts don't need to commit felony offenses either handling drugs, buying drugs, or stealing something to buy drugs. Recovering addicts could start to rebuild their lives, maybe even get a job and start paying taxes, which not only would be great for them, but for their communities as well. And it can be done. I'm living proof that a heroin addict can live a productive and successful life if we just give them a fighting chance, like so many others did for me. But ignoring these drug addicts and mentally ill individuals, or making stricter laws to lock these folks up that desperately need our help, will not only guarantee they'll remain a financial burden to our entire society, but it will also guarantee that this will continue to be a severe public health issue that will only get worse over time, as we've already seen day after day after day, until we finally decide to do something different. And it's sad to say, but the truth of the matter is, if helping others was wildly profitable, America would be the world leader in helping. But it's not profitable, so it just goes largely ignored. But the bottom line is, the United States has the ability and the resources to fix this growing epidemic immediately. So why don't we start to fix it together?